At the beginning of the 20th century, Europe was experiencing what was perhaps one of the most self-confident and peaceful periods in human history. Major cities glowed at night, cafes and restaurants were full, factories operated day and night, and every minute a train was departing. With the Industrial Revolution, science and technology gave people the sense that every problem could now be solved. Electrical infrastructure was expanding, telegraph lines were connecting continents, and industry was breaking production records. For this reason, many Europeans believed that a major war was no longer possible. War was now a mistake of the past, but this belief was merely covering up a great illusion. On the surface, everything in Europe appeared stable and orderly, but behind the scenes, a silent rivalry was growing among the great powers. Germany was a newly unified empire established in 1871. It was rapidly expanding its industry, modernizing its army, and altering the balance of power in Europe. Germany's rise deeply unsettled Britain and France in particular. France carried a profound trauma of defeat against Germany. The loss of Alsace-Lorraine in 1871 remained an open wound in French politics and collective memory. The United Kingdom saw itself as the arbiter of Europe. Any disruption to the balance of the continent threatened British interests. Russia had assumed the role of protector of the Slavic peoples in the Balkans. For both ideological and strategic reasons, it sought to expand its influence in the region. And Austria-Hungary, an old and fragile empire, home to many different nationalities. For Austria-Hungary, the real threat was not outside its borders, but within. These great powers formed alliances to feel secure, but instead of guaranteeing peace, these alliances made war inevitable. Because any crisis would not concern just two countries. When one nation took action, its allies were automatically drawn into the process. Diplomacy had given way to military reflexes. This system turned Europe into a massive chain, and the breaking of a single link meant the collapse of the entire chain. The weakest link in this chain was the Balkans. The Balkans were the region where nationalism was felt most intensely. The retreat of the Ottoman Empire had created a power vacuum, leading to new conflicts. Serbia saw itself as the leader of all Slavic peoples. The idea of a greater Serbia found strong support, especially among Slavs living within Austrian territory. This was a threat that Austria-Hungary could not ignore. Russia supported Serbia. This support turned every tension in the Balkans into a Europe-wide crisis. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary made an official visit to Sarajevo. This was not an ordinary state visit. Sarajevo was a city where nationalist anger had been silently accumulating. Franz Ferdinand, without realizing it, was touching the most sensitive nerve of the empire. In this tense atmosphere, a young nationalist named Gavrilo Princip saw the visit as a turning point. Princip viewed Bosnia's rule under Austria-Hungary as an occupation. To him, these lands belonged to the South Slavic peoples who should determine their own destiny. Princip and the nationalist circles he belonged to saw this visit as a rare opportunity to make their voices heard and send a symbolic and political message. Their aim went beyond eliminating a single individual. They wanted to shake the balance of power in the Balkans and drag the great powers into a crisis. On the morning of June 28th, Sarajevo was unusually tense. The route of the Archduke's motorcade had been determined, and streets were secured by soldiers and police. Despite all precautions, the tension in the city was impossible to conceal. Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie were traveling through the city center in an open-top car. The Archduke believed in maintaining close contact with the public. This choice posed a serious security risk, but Ferdinand refused to step back. Along the route, nationalist groups waited in silence, bombs in their hands, pistols concealed. Each of them knew they were part of a moment that could change the course of history. Hours later, a confusion along the motorcade's route changed everything. The car turned into the wrong street and stopped, right in front of Gavrilo Princip, just a few meters away. This was not a planned moment, but it was a perfect opportunity. Princip raised his gun and fired 2 shots. One bullet struck Franz Ferdinand in the neck. The other bullet hit Sophie in the lower abdomen, causing fatal internal bleeding. According to witnesses, Franz Ferdinand leaned over his wife and repeatedly whispered, "Sophie, don't die. Don't die, Sophie. Live for our children." But the bleeding could not be stopped. First, Franz Ferdinand died, and minutes later, Sophie followed. As the clock passed 11 a.m., the deaths of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne and his wife were officially announced. Dramatic closing recommended. This was more than an assassination, because it was not only 2 people who died in that car. Europe's fragile peace was also gasping for its final breath, and now the fuse of a massive crisis had been lit. After the tragic assassination, Europe held its breath for an entire month. Austria-Hungary wanted to punish Serbia, but it feared Russian intervention. Germany offered unconditional support, encouraging Austria-Hungary to act. On July 23, 1914, Austria-Hungary presented Serbia with an ultimatum. The demands were extremely harsh. The ultimatum required Serbia to dissolve nationalist organizations, end all nationalist activities linked to the assassination, restrict freedom of the press, and reshape its education system according to Austrian demands. But one clause clearly stood apart. Austria-Hungary demanded that its own police and judicial officials be allowed to operate freely within Serbian territory. This meant direct interference in Serbia's internal affairs. Serbia was given only 48 hours to respond. The government in Belgrade was under immense diplomatic pressure. Relying on Russian support but trying to avoid war, Serbia made an unexpected move. Serbia accepted most of the ultimatum's demands. It agreed to press restrictions, the closure of organizations, and investigations. But one clause was crossed out in bold. Serbia rejected the demand allowing Austrian officials to operate independently within its borders. This response did not satisfy Vienna and was deemed insufficient. The possibility of a diplomatic solution was now gone, and this reply was accepted as a sufficient and legitimate justification for war. The question was no longer what Serbia accepted or rejected, but when the war would begin. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. This decision was not merely the result of an assassination. It was the natural outcome of years of accumulated nationalism, alliance systems, and imperial fears. Within the following month, all of Europe was dragged into war. This conflict quickly turned into a global catastrophe. The war that began in 1914 not only killed millions, but also brought an era to an end.